Okay, so another review question for sponges. Melissa, what were the two specialized, without looking at your notes, what were the two specialized cells in sponges that help them eat? Do you remember one?
No, can you give me what it starts with?
One starts with an A, the other starts with a C.
Oh, the collar cells, and then the
Collar cells?
was one of them the light bulb looking thing?
That was the collar cells. Collar cells are light bulb looking.
What's the second one? Amoeba?
Amoebocytes. Amoebocytes, yep. Remember, they're not actually amoebas. They must move slow and deliver the nutrients to the rest of the cells within the sponge. Noah, what type of symmetry would sponges have?
Radial? No. The B one?
Bilateral?
Yeah, bilateral.
No, in this case, sponges are asymmetrical. Yep, because if you think about how a sponge, well, even you can just look at these, there's no way, because of the way the pores are located and stuff like that, that they actually would copy each other where you could fold it in on itself. So sponges are asymmetrical. A majority of the cnidarians that we're going to look at today are going to be radially symmetrical, at least at some point in their life. At some point in their life, they may be bilaterally symmetrical, like when they're in the larval stage, when they're young, they might be bilateral. And then as they grow into an adult, they become the typical, if you think of jellyfish, the typical bell-shaped, and then you could divide it around a circle from underneath, if you think of it that way. So that'd be radial. Okay? So now I'm just going to hit the red button here, share. That's annoying. How do I move you? There, that. Well, then it goes away anyway. Okay, so cnidarian, the term cnidarian comes from the word cnidocyte, which you're going to see on the slides here in a second. Cnidocytes are cells that sting. And obviously, if you think of sea anemones, you think of jellyfish, they have the tentacles that have stinging cells at the end. And so that's where they're going to get that name from. The previous phylum name was Coelenterata. And I think that's what's listed on your notes. It says Coelenterata, and then I think it says cnidaria. Coelenterata means hollow gut, which if you think of jellyfish, it has that hollow looking chamber to it. And so that's kind of where it gets its original name from. They are already more complex than the sponges. The sponges were very, very simple. Circulatory system, respiratory system will be the same. It's all diffusion. They're not thick enough or complex enough to have like lungs or gills. They don't have a heart. They don't have blood vessels. They don't have blood. They can get all the oxygen they need simply through diffusion. The cnidarian body comes into two different forms. The polyp form is the sessile version. So your sea anemones and your coral would be polyps. They look vase-shaped with the tentacles pointed up. All right? The medusa, when you hear medusa, what do you think of? The snakehead lady, yeah, from Greek mythology. Okay, it's kind of a similar look here with the jellyfish. They're in that familiar medusa shape. It's a bell shape with the tentacles hanging down. Okay, so that's where the medusa comes from. At some point, even the jellyfish are going to start off as a polyp. And then as they mature, they become the familiar bell-shaped medusa. Okay. Another difference between sponges or porifera and cnidarians. Remember, porifera had no true tissue layers. Cnidarians have two. They have an epidermis and a gastrodermis. What's our epidermis? What, for us, what is our epidermis?
Our skin.
Yeah, yep, an outer covering. So in cnidarians, the outer covering is, the outer layer is called the epidermis. The gastrodermis is on the inside. So even at formation of a larval cnidarian, you're going to have two true tissue layers right away. Remember these terms. If you need to highlight those two terms, go ahead. But you're going to need to know the two tissue layers of cnidarians, epidermis and gastrodermis. The reason you need to know that is because it's different than anything else. You'll also need to know the shapes, which I think are also listed there. Am I correct? Somewhere in there it should say medusa and polyp. Know those two things as well. Right. The mesoglia is a layer in between the epidermis and gastrodermis, and it's kind of got a jelly. Well, that's where jellyfish comes from. A jelly substance in between the two layers. That's the mesoglia. Meso means middle, so it's in between. And we're familiar with the tentacles. I don't think I need to get into that much. As far as the digestive system goes, so remember, sponges did not have a mouth and they did not have an anus. They didn't have any digestive tract. They used the amoebocytes and they used the collar cells to eat. The cnidarians actually will have a mouth. And that's it. They don't really have another digestive tract. Okay, so once they eat whatever it is they're going to eat, and they capture their prey with their tentacles, stun them, pull them in, eat them, they will digest the food, and then any waste products will either be diffused out or some bits may have to come back out the mouth, okay, because they don't have any other digestive tract to get rid of those waste products. I would say a majority of that stuff is probably diffused out because they're very thin. Okay, cnidarians have cnidocytes, which are stinging cells. And on those cnidocytes are the actual harpoons called nematocysts. They're coiled up, and not all jellyfish have this. Sometimes they just use their tentacles to wrap around their prey. But a lot of them have these stinging cells that there's a hair that kind of sticks out beyond the typical tentacle. And when something rubs up against that, it's like a sensory hair. It pulls the trigger on the cnidocyte, or excuse me, on the nematocyst, and it harpoons that particular organism and injects it with a toxin. And that's what stings it. And if you look up jellyfish stings, look up some pictures of maybe the Portuguese man of war, and you'll see some major sting marks on people. Those can be lethal, although I think the box jellies as a whole are probably the most lethal of jellyfish. Some pretty good ones. I've stepped on a jellyfish before because it was on the beach, and it did not feel very good.
Like, what does a jellyfish leave on you after it stings? Like, is it just like?
I would assume a protein of some sort. I don't know if it's an acid. I don't know how it actually.
So does it
works,
like make your skin rise?
Yeah. Yes.
And it
does.
makes it swollen and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
There's some that are just like dots and then some of them are like a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in Costa Rica, we got stung by little jellyfish.
The little ones.
Yeah, really small. They
Yeah.
couldn't even see them.
Yeah. Huh.
It hurt really bad.
Did you pee on it?
But they never
Oh. Okay. Another difference between cnidarians and sponges. They have a very simple nervous system called a nerve net. This nerve net is not actually controlled by a brain, so to speak, but these nerve cells are interconnected. And so all of the cells are basically kind of on the same page. And they don't have eyes. And so jellyfish, when you're out in the water, are not going to come after you. Okay, so unless you're playing Super Mario Brothers, these things can't like see you and physically come after you. However, there's usually so many of them, you just can't get over them. You just run into them and you get stung. There are 4 different classes of these. I will tell you, for your test, you will not need to know these individual ones. What I would say is you should know some examples in general of cnidarians, okay? So the 4 classes include hydrozoa, which the man-o'-war is part of that. Hydras, which are freshwater cnidarians. They're in the vase shape, though, and you'll see some stuff on these guys here in a minute. The box jellies are in the next class. The scyphozoa, that's your common jellyfish, is in that group. And then the anthozoa is your sea anemones and your coral. So they live their life as polyps. So here's a hydra. And like I said, hydras are actually freshwater cnidarians. I don't think there are any freshwater jellyfish. I think they're all saltwater jellyfish.
Freshwater hydras exist only as solitary polyps. They live in quiet streams attached to leaves and rocks with a sticky substance they secrete from their basal disc. Freshwater hydra can move by tumbling. While resting on its basal disc, it bends over until its tentacles are in contact with the surface it is resting on. The hydra decreases the stickiness of the material secreted by its basal disc. It pulls its basal disc free from the surface and flips it to the other side of its tentacles. It then releases a sticky substance that holds the basal disc in place, and it raises its tentacles. Hydras will flip over several times to move along the surface.
Whee! It tumbles. So this is kind of interesting too. Jellyfish actually have separate sexes, which I think it's going to talk about here in a minute. But hydras also can reproduce sexually, but they can also reproduce asexually by budding, kind of like the sponges can do.
Hydras reproduce both asexually and sexually. During warm weather, hydras generally reproduce asexually. Small buds develop on the outside of the hydra's body and develop into new hydras. In the fall, low temperatures trigger sexual reproduction. Swellings called testes and ovaries form along the body of the hydra. The ovaries produce eggs. The testes produce sperm, which are released into the water and swim into the ovaries of other hydras where they fertilize the eggs. Fertilized eggs develop into embryos. Hard coverings protect the embryos through the winter. In the spring, the embryo hatches and develops into a new hydra.
Once again, foreign material swimming through the water. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go through the jellyfish reproduction. But this is all sexual. There are actually differences between male and female jellyfish.
Jellyfish reproduce sexually. Adult males release sperm into the water, and adult females release eggs into the water. Some of the sperm fertilize some of the eggs. The resulting zygotes divide many times to form a blastula.
Just like us.
The blastula develops into a ciliated larva called a planula. The planula attaches to a surface and develops into a polyp. As the polyp grows, it forms a stack of medusas. The medusas detach and develop into free-swimming jellyfish.
Bye-bye. Next. Okay.
Cnidarians have two forms, the medusa and the polyp. Some cnidarians are polyps and medusas at different times in their life, but most cnidarians spend their whole life as a polyp.
Again, remember the difference between the medusa and the polyp. Medusa is the bell-shaped one. Polyp is the vase-shaped one that's upside down. Tentacles pointed up.
Medusas are free-swimming forms of cnidarians. A familiar example of a medusa is a jellyfish. Medusas are bell-shaped with tentacles hanging off of the bell. Polyps usually live attached to a surface, such as a rock. Polyps are vase-shaped with tentacles at the top of the vase around the mouth. While medusas and polyps look very different, they are made up of the same body parts. The difference is in the arrangement of body parts.
Ctenophores, I'm not going to really spend a ton of time on this. This is kind of cool though. Sometimes if you're out, if you're on a boat or something in the ocean and you see this glistening underwater, these ctenophores can produce bioluminescence. It's a protein that allows them to kind of glow in the dark, and it causes this glistening. If you've ever watched the movie Sing, which I've watched at least some music videos a ton, they use those jellyfish that glow, and basically it'd be this. Okay. Oh, there we go. I want to show you the.
Cnidarians get their name from specialized cells called cnidocytes. Cnidocytes are used for defense and capturing prey. Each cnidocyte contains an organelle called a nematocyst. The nematocyst has a long filament coiled up inside it. Each cnidocyte also has a trigger. When an object brushes against the trigger, the nematocyst pushes the filament out of the cell with great force. Some nematocysts have sharp spines that inject poison into the object. Others have filaments that adhere to the object by wrapping around it.
Okay, so they're coiled up, they're ready to fire until they get, as soon as something swims by it and triggers it, it fires out, and it may have barbs on it to inject toxins, or it just may wrap around the prey. Oops. Yeah, that's fine. So you can see we're getting more complex. We're climbing this tree. All of these in this tree are invertebrates, so none of the vertebrates are listed here yet. Okay, I'm going to pass these around. This, let's see if I can blow this up. Whee! For all you folks at home. Okay, this jellyfish has seen better days, but you can kind of get a general idea. You can find the mouth. There it is. I have to shake it around a little bit. Definitely falling apart. This right here, this is a sea anemone. And so this would be the polyp shape with the tentacles pointed up. These tentacles, this is a pretty small example of a sea anemone. Not a great picture. And then the last thing I got, this is coral, but this is this coral reefs are stacked on top of each other, just coral skeleton remains. And then the new coral grow on top of that, and then it just keeps adding and adding and adding. This one is a good example of bleaching. When coral reefs are affected by pollution, temperature changes, things like that, they die. And they do this process called bleaching, which this is what's left behind. If you guys did any scuba diving, or if you did any, did you go snorkeling? Which is awesome. You are not supposed to touch the coral. First of all, a lot of it's sharp, so you can cut yourself. But two, you can also damage and kill the coral. And so that's a important no-no.
Yeah, we were specifically told, we were like, you can't touch the ground.
Yeah, which fortunately in salt water it's a little easier to do. So I'll pass this around. You can kind of see, obviously it provides a lot of different habitat for small fish and other invertebrates and stuff to hide. You think of clownfish and how they can swim in between all the tentacles and they don't get stung for whatever reason. Makes a pretty nice little home for a lot of different organisms. Okay, quick review. How many tissue layers, DJ, does a cnidarian have? How many true tissue layers? And we named them. Two. Very good. Does everybody remember what they were? Yep. Epidermis and gastrocdermis. Good. Does the cnidarian have a digestive system?
Yes.
Yes.
What does it have?
A gastrointestinal cavity.
Okay. And a mouth, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Does it have two openings?
No.
No. So I would consider the digestive system of cnidarians incomplete. Okay, it's incomplete because it doesn't have an opening and a exit, an entrance and an exit. So it's an incomplete digestive tract. What about a nervous system?
A nerve net.
Nerve net. No true brain, no cluster of cells that act like a mini brain. So it does not show cephalization. It doesn't have a true head end. Okay, so far, we went from peripheral that have no nervous system whatsoever to a nerve net in cnidarians. As we go forward, which I think we get in platyhelminthes next, which is flatworms, we'll get even more complex. Okay. You guys have the cnidarian worksheet to do. Not very long again. And get that complete and turned in. And we'll exit this. Bye-bye.